It's funny how you get used to things like I've been a ranger at Glacier National Park for years, and the quiet never bothered me. In fact, that's what I loved about the off-season. Just me, the mountains, and the kind of silence you can't find unless you're deep in the wilderness. So, checking the trail cameras was just routine. Nothing ever really changed, until one day it did. So there I was, the cold biting at my cheeks, making my rounds before the deep snow made it a real chore. I'd swing by the trail cams, those little electric eyes we've got perched in the wild to keep tabs on the wildlife. Usually it's just a bunch of night shots of deer or the occasional bear bum shuffling through the brush. But that night, I found one camera face down in the dirt, like it had seen something so shocking it fainted. I chuckled at the thought of that happening, propped it back up, and decided to check the footage back at the station. A mug of steaming coffee would make reviewing the footage much more enjoyable. So once I got back, I flipped the switch and hunkered down to watch. The screen flickered to life, and there it was. Not a bear, not a deer, but something, I'm not sure what. Something tall and pale, moving all wrong, like it was part human, part shadow, all wrong. I remember leaning forward, squinting, thinking, what in the world? It was a curveball I hadn't expected. The timestamp on the video said just after midnight when this figure strolled by. It was large, larger than any person had any right to be, and it had this pale look to it, not like it was sickly, but like it wasn't made for daylight. It was gaunt, really gaunt, with limbs that seemed too long for its body, and it walked with this gait that seemed like every step was a chore. The way it moved, it was like it was fighting against a wind that wasn't there. I must have watched that clip a dozen times, trying to make sense of it. Was it fog or mist in the air? Someone screwing around, trying to stir up a legend or something? I was literally coming up with any plausible thought I could. But the more I watched it, the less sense it made. It didn't look right, didn't move right, and the thing that got me the most was how the eyes looked. You could just make them out on the footage, too big for its face, and they seemed to reflect the moonlight like an animal's. I showed it to a couple of the other rangers, but they were just as stumped as I was. We've all seen our fair share of weirdness in the woods, but this took the cake. It didn't fit any pattern, didn't match any known animal behavior that any of us had experienced or learned about. And it wasn't just the figure itself. It was the feeling it left you with, like you'd seen something you weren't supposed to, something that wasn't part of our normal world, a secret of some kind. The next few nights, I found myself drawn to that spot where I found the downed camera. I don't know what I was expecting to find. Tracks, maybe, or some sign that it was just a person after all. But there was nothing, no footprints, no scraps of clothing caught on the brush, nothing. I went over it all in my head, every possibility, but none of them fit. It was like my brain couldn't hold on to the thought of it for too long before it slipped away, like it was too strange for my mind to want to keep. I'm not much for ghost stories or conspiracy theories. I always figured there's an explanation for everything, even if we don't know it yet. But this was something else. It was like a puzzle with pieces missing, and no picture on the box to guide you. The footage is locked away now, marked as an unidentified animal sighting. We get a few of those from time to time, and usually they turn out to be a lost dog or a blurry photo of a deer. But this one's different. It doesn't get mentioned much, but it's there, this unspoken question among the staff. I still work the trails, still enjoy the quiet, but sometimes, when the sun dips behind the peaks and the shadows get long, I find myself looking over my shoulder, wondering if whatever it was is still out there, watching. And I can't shake the feeling that it knows something we don't, something about the wild places of the world where the maps end and the mysteries just begin. And believe me when I tell you that there are a lot of those wild places here in Glacier. Hey everyone, picture this. Ethan, your everyday park ranger, a guy who finds peace in the darkness of the night forest, suddenly hits a bump in his routine. On a night like any other in Rocky Mountain National Park, an out-of-place rhythm of knocks in the dead of the woods throws a curveball into his quiet night shift. By the break of dawn, he's standing face to face with a puzzle that nature itself can't solve. It's the kind of story that transforms an ordinary patch of trees into an absolutely extraordinary mystery. So if you're itching for a tale that's as bizarre as it is true, don't go anywhere else and sit yourself right down. Here is Ethan's story, and it is about to change the way you hear the sounds of the night. So you know how sometimes you end up in situations where your brain goes, "Nope, not dealing with this today"? Well, that's what happened to Ethan. This dude loved the night shift. Yeah, loved it. The kind of love you have for a good old couch that's seen better days but is comfy as heck. He worked as a park ranger, and that meant he spent his nights surrounded by the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Ethan was no stranger to the random noises that come with the territory, the crack of a twig, the rustle of leaves, you name it. But this one night, things got weird. It started with a knock, not the, "oh look, a woodpecker" kind of knock, but a rhythmic, intentional kind of sound. Knock, knock, knock. It echoed, bouncing off the valley walls like some creepy Morse code. Now, Ethan wasn't one to spook easily, but this sound had him on edge. It wasn't an animal. He'd bet his favorite flashlight on that. And it wasn't the wind. This was a still night, the kind where the air feels like it's holding its breath. He spent the rest of his shift with one ear cocked, waiting for it to happen again. It didn't. So when dawn cracked, Ethan was out there, walking through the park with the first light painting everything that calm gold color. He was trying to convince himself he'd imagined the whole thing. But then he saw the trees. It was like a giant had come through, twisting the branches into shapes that made no sense. It wasn't random damage like you'd see after a storm. This was deliberate, artistic almost, in a wild, twisted way. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up because nature doesn't do right angles and spirals on its own. There was this one tree, its branches woven into a kind of arch. Ethan walked through it, and that's when he found the tracks. They were big, way too big for any critter that called the park home. And the stride was all wrong for a person. Too long, too heavy. He followed them, his heart doing that thing where it feels like it's trying to beat its way out of your chest. The tracks led to the edge of a lake, right to the water's edge. And that's where he saw it, the dog man. This wasn't some Halloween costume or a trick of the light. It was as real as the ground beneath Ethan's boots. It stood on two legs, covered in fur that looked like the night sky had fallen on it, dark, with flecks of gray. Its eyes, man, its eyes were like molten gold, burning in a face that was too wolf to be human and too human to be wolf. Ethan froze. You know that feeling, right? When your brain's yelling, "Run, you idiot," but your legs are like, "Nah, we're good here." It was looking right at him, and there was this sense of, I don't know, recognition? Like it knew Ethan, knew he'd heard the knocks, knew he'd come looking. The dogman tilted its head, the way your dog does when you're eating something and it's hoping you'll share. Except Ethan wasn't about to toss it a Scooby snack. And then just like that, it turned and loped off into the forest, moving with a grace that didn't fit its size. Ethan stood there for who knows how long, staring at the spot where it disappeared. The silence of the morning felt different now, heavy with a secret that was just his to keep, because who'd believe him? He didn't even believe it, and he'd seen it with his own eyes. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Ethan did his rounds, fixed a sign or two, but his mind was on that dogman. Night came again, and he was back on shift, listening. But there were no knocks that night, or any night after. And the trees? They stayed twisted up. a reminder that some things don't have an explanation. Ethan never saw the dogman again, but he knew it was out there, a part of the park as much as the trees and the lakes. He kept an ear out every night, though, half hoping, half dreading he'd hear those knocks again. But some secrets, it seems, are meant to be kept, and some creatures are meant to be mysteries. And Ethan, he was okay with that, because not knowing, not for sure, it keeps the world interesting, doesn't it? In the depths of the Sequoia National Park, a secret lay hidden, one that hadn't touched the modern world until Kevin stumbled upon it and unearthed a mystery that had been silently etched in stone for centuries. Picture this: ancient petroglyphs and a journey to the unknown. Join in as we hear what happened to Kevin in the fall of 2013. Kevin's first season working at Sequoia National Park in California was meant to be the first of many years working as a park ranger. He never expected it to lead him to a mystery that was centuries old. It was late September, and Kevin had taken to his duties like a fish to water, feeling a huge responsibility towards maintaining the park. His job was routine, consisting of maintenance work, guiding visitors, and ensuring that the rules were respected by those who came to enjoy its beauty. But all that routine was disrupted one morning when Kevin, clearing a lesser-known trail, stumbled upon a series of markings that seemed completely out of place. The markings were etched into a rock face that was usually shadowed by a grouping of towering sequoias. It was only because of a recently fallen tree that sunlight was now shining on the surface of the rock, revealing the ancient art. The markings depicted what appeared to be a creature, something luminous with an aura that seemed to be etched in a different style than the rest of the art. Kevin's heart thumped against his chest with a mix of excitement and a creeping sense of confusion. The petroglyphs weren't something he was familiar with, and they weren't in any of the park's records or guided tours. He took out his phone, snapped a few pictures, and decided to bring it up with the park historian. But as night fell and Kevin lay, trying to sleep in his small cabin, the images of the petroglyphs projected onto the backs of his eyelid, and he felt a pull. Something was calling him back to the hidden rock face, and it wasn't far. So he pulled himself out of bed and decided to head there. Equipped with just a flashlight, Kevin trekked through the darkness, the sounds of the nocturnal life noticeably different than day noises, a reminder that life in the park thrived even at night. His beam of light was his only guide until he reached the site of the petroglyphs. He expected stillness and quiet when he arrived, but instead, he found illumination. Before him, standing as if it had stepped right out of the stone, was the exact creature from the petroglyphs. It was glowing with a light that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the forest. Kevin froze, his breath caught somewhere between his chest and the night air. The creature wasn't menacing. Rather, it seemed peaceful. The being before him stood on 4 slender limbs, each ending in fine, almost hand-like appendages. Its skin glowed softly, casting a gentle light on the trees. The creature's eyes, large and unblinking, held Kevin's gaze as the two of them watched each other. As Kevin's initial shock subsided, he took in the finer details of the creature's form. It had a gracefulness to it. It seemed to be both liquid and solid, moving with an organic rhythm that was similar to the sequoias above. Along its back, a row of delicate leaf-like appendages moved with each breath. The creature then started to walk away from the area. It snapped out of its slow movement and now moved with purpose. Kevin followed it. The forest now seemed different as they walked through it together. There never was a destination that night, and the creature eventually disappeared into the trees, leaving Kevin no choice but to return home. After that whole encounter with the glowing creature, Kevin couldn't just let it go. He had a million questions buzzing in his head and no answers. So the next morning, after a night with pretty much zero sleep, He hit up the park historian. The historian was stumped, never heard of anything like it before. They spent the whole day digging through old park records, talking about legends and stories from the local tribes, but nothing matched the creature Kevin had seen. One evening, he's on a routine sweep of the trails, and he starts feeling this pull towards the west side of the park, an area that's pretty dense and not exactly on his usual route. He follows this feeling, right? And there it is again, that soft glow between the trees, just like the first night. He walks towards it, heart pounding out of his chest, but this time he finds nothing. And he starts to wonder if the whole thing is just a crazy dream he had, like one of those dreams that totally seem like reality and you can't tell them apart. Eventually, he stopped trying to tell others about it, realizing this was something personal, something that wasn't meant to be shared or explained away, especially because it might not even be true. So that's Kevin's wild story. A guy goes to work in a park, looking for a break from city life, and ends up with a secret straight out of a fantasy book. He still works there, and every now and then, on a quiet night, he'll take a walk to that old, twisted tree just to check in. He never knows if he's going to see that glowing creature again, but that's okay. It's become a part of his routine, a part of his story, and he wouldn't have it any other way. Have you ever gazed up at the vast expanse of sky above and felt curious about what's out there? Our next story ventures into a realm where the lines blur, revealing an encounter that challenges everything we think we know. This tale isn't just about looking into the unknown, it's about the unknown looking back. This story, rooted in the experiences of a single person, invites us to consider the possibilities that lie beyond our normal understanding. Enter Alex Taylor, a 28-year-old software developer with a mind as logical as they come. Alex had always been fascinated by the stars. He told me that stargazing was his way to escape, to connect with the universe. Pine Grove, the town where he lived, with its picturesque landscapes and quaint charm, is the last place you'd expect the extraordinary to happen. But you will soon see that even the most unassuming places can become the backdrop for events that defy explanation. It's here, in this serene setting, that Alex's beliefs and understanding of the world would be challenged like never before. Living in Pine Grove offered Alex the perfect location for his stargazing. The town, with its open spaces and minimal light pollution, was an amateur astronomer's dream. And so, on a night that seemed like any other, Alex set out, telescope in hand, expecting nothing more than a peaceful evening under the stars. However, he was about to have an experience that would turn his world upside down. The evening started out normally with Alex setting up his telescope, eager to catch a glimpse of the rare comet scheduled to cross the night sky that night. But as the night progressed, a strange spectacle developed instead. The sky, usually familiar to him, lit up with a display of lights unlike anything he had ever seen. It became this crazy mix of colors and patterns that defied natural explanation. And then Alex watched as one of the crazy patterns pulled itself into a unified object that quietly and stealthily floated down a short distance away in the trees. Shocked by what he thought he was seeing, Alex decided to slowly approach the area where he watched the object descend. And so here it is, in Alex's own words, the details about what happened next. The truth is that I didn't know what to expect. The night was still, almost eerily so, and every step felt like I was moving further from a reality that I knew and understood. I reached the clearing where I'd seen the object land, half expecting it to be gone, a figment of my imagination. But it was there, right in front of me, an object, not too large, but clearly not something from this world. It was smooth and metallic, with a faint hum that was almost soothing. I circled around it, my logical mind trying to categorize it. to make sense of its presence here in Pine Grove, but it was beyond anything I'd ever encountered. I thought about running back home, grabbing my phone to capture this moment, but something about the object called to me, a silent plea to be understood on its own terms, not through the lens of technology. So I stayed, my eyes fixed on the strange visitor before me. As I watched, a panel on the side of the object began to shift, opening with a precision that was mesmerizing. I should have been scared, I guess, but I wasn't. It was like all the stories I'd ever heard about otherworldly encounters were just that, stories, and now I was in one. From the opening, a figure emerged, not menacing, but curious. It was slender, taller than any person I'd ever seen, with a glow that seemed to emanate from within. We stood there, in the quiet of the night, looking at each other. No words were exchanged, none were needed. In that moment, I knew this was a pivotal encounter, not just for me, but maybe for all of us here on this little planet. The figure looked around, taking in the trees, the sky, and then back at me. Its eyes, if you could call them that, held a depth of intelligence and emotion. There was no doubt in my mind. This was a being capable of thoughts, of feelings, and it was here, in Pine Grove of all places. I don't know how long we stood there, but it felt timeless. Eventually, the figure gestured towards the stars, and a part of the sky lit up, showing a constellation that I'd never noticed before. It was a communication, a sharing of its home, I realized. The figure then turned back to the object, and as it did, the air around us began to shimmer, like the space itself was bending, warping. I could feel the hairs on my arms stand, a static charge building around us. And then, as quickly as it had opened, the panel closed, and the object lifted off the ground, soundlessly. It paused, as if to acknowledge me one last time, and then shot off into the night sky, leaving behind a trail of light that faded into the stars. I stayed in the clearing for a while longer, the night silent once again. The comet that I'd come to see was no longer the night's main attraction. My mind raced with questions, with the sheer magnitude of what had happened. Pine Grove, my quiet little sanctuary, had been a waypoint for a traveler from the stars, and I, Alex Taylor, a man of logic and code, had been a part of it. It's funny how life throws these curveballs at you. One minute you're just a guy with a telescope, and the next, you're standing face to face with, well, I don't even have a word for it. It's not an experience you just move on from. It changes you, forces you to open up to the improbable, the impossible. My name is Joe, and I recently moved to Astoria, Oregon about a year ago. I took up running, mostly because the place is insanely beautiful in a moody Pacific Northwest kind of way, and it helps clear my head. I work at this little dive that serves the freshest seafood you can imagine, but running, that's where I find my peace. I remember lacing up my sneakers that day. The fog was so thick it looked like the world had been wrapped in a heavy gray blanket. Couldn't see the other end of my street. Weird for a June morning, you know, but I needed that run to clear my head more than anything. I set out the usual route through the park. The fog muffled everything. Sounds were all hushed, and it was like I was the only person left around. Kind of eerie, but I was digging the solitude, to be honest. It's rare to find that kind of quiet in the city. So, I'm hitting my stride, lost in the rhythm of my breath and the soft thud of my feet on the path, when I get this prickling feeling on the back of my neck. You know that feeling? Like someone's watching you? I slow down, turn around, and through the fog, I see this shape. It's following me, but it's all blurry, edges not making any sense. Not a person, not an animal, just something else. It's floating, kinda not really walking, and every time I stop, it stops like we're doing some weird dance. I'm thinking, okay, this is odd, but I'm not freaking out or anything, just super curious. So this goes on for a while. I run, it follows. I stop, it stops. And the wild thing is, I don't feel scared. You'd think I would, right? But it's more like someone's just curious about me. Like they're wondering what I'm doing out here in the soup-thick fog. I start testing it, you know? I zigzag, double back, and every move I make, it mirrors. It's actually kind of fun, like playing tag with a shadow. But then the fog starts lifting, like curtains going up after a show. Bit by bit, the park comes into view, the trees, the benches, everything back to normal. And I turn around to get another look at my mystery follower, and there's nothing. Just clear, open path, and the usual morning joggers starting to trickle in. Now I'm standing there, catching my breath, trying to wrap my head around it. Did I imagine the whole thing? Was it some kind of trick of the light? But it felt real, too real. I finish my run, but I can't shake the feeling all day. It's stuck with me, this sense of something unexplainable crossing paths with me. I go back the next day, same time, half hoping, half dreading it'll show up again. But it's just a regular run. The fog's gone, and so is the figure. I've thought a lot about it since then, about what it could have been, a trick of my mind, a reflection of something, or maybe something else, something that doesn't have a name. Whatever it was, it didn't mean me any harm. It was just there, sharing a moment in the fog with me, and when its time was up, it just moved on. I still run that route, almost every day. The fogs come back a few times, but that morning, that strange, quiet dance with the unknown, it's a one-time deal. Makes me wonder how many other little mysteries are out there, brushing up against us, just out of sight. Makes the world seem bigger, you know? More interesting. So that's my story. Not sure what to make of it, but I guess some things aren't meant to be figured out. Just experienced. I grew up in a small town that you've probably never heard of and wouldn't visit unless you took a wrong turn. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business before it even happens. My folks ran the local diner. Dad was the king of the grill, and Mom, she had a way with pie that could make a grown man cry. I was the kid with his nose always in a book, dreaming about what was beyond our little town. High school was a blur of football games I never cared about, and dances I never had the nerve to attend. After I graduated, the whole town expected me to take up the apron and flip burgers alongside Dad. But that life? It was too small for me. I needed to see what was out there, to find stories of my own. So, with a couple $100 saved up and a beat-up car I bought from Old Man Jenkins, I left without looking back. So I bounced around, gigs here and there, wrote for anyone that would pay me, about everything from city council meetings to school board scandals. Exciting stuff, right? But it paid the bills, mostly. And when it didn't, there was always the diner to fall back on, but that was my last resort. It feels like I've been on the move ever since, chasing down leads for stories that sometimes pan out and sometimes don't. I've seen a lot of the country this way, met people I'd never have crossed paths with if I'd stayed in my hometown. Some of them have been sources, some of them have become friends, and a few of them, well, let's just say they've made me believe that there's more to this world than we can see. So there I was, driving through what seemed like the endless stretch of the Mojave Desert in California, the kind of place where the horizon's just a blurry line between the sand and the sky. And of course, the AC in the car was busted, and with every mile it felt like the sun was getting closer and hotter, like it had some sort of vendetta against me. I'd been on the road since sunrise, chasing an interview that I wasn't even sure I wanted to write. But hey, a job's a job, right? The only other souls I'd seen were the occasional buzzards, circling overhead, probably betting amongst themselves when the car would finally give up so they could swoop down on me. I squinted through the windshield, the glare turning everything outside into a sort of watercolor wash. That's when I saw it. It wasn't like anything I could chalk up to the usual suspects. No coyote, no jackrabbit. This was different. It was big, and it moved with a sort of grace that didn't belong to the desert. And fast? Man, it was like it had the cheat codes to the game of life, zipping across the desert like it was on invisible rails. The thing, whatever it was there and then it wasn't, like flipping a switch. 1 second you're staring at a marvel of nature or a figment of your imagination, and the next, it's just the same old empty desert. My first thought, heat stroke. Maybe I was just seeing things. Happens to the best of us. But part of me, the part that loves those late-night mystery shows, started to think I'd seen something real. Something that didn't have a name yet. Something that wasn't supposed to exist. I pulled over, the car's tires crunching on the mix of rock and sand that passed for a shoulder on this forgotten highway. I stepped out, the heat hitting me like a wall, took my hat off, wiped the sweat from my brow, and shaded my eyes for a better look. Nothing but the dance of heat waves rising off the desert floor. I considered going after it, but let's be real. In this heat, with my luck, I'd be the next unsolved mystery. So, I did the sensible thing. I got back in the car, took a swig of what was now basically hot water, and drove on. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, though, half expecting to see that thing keeping pace, maybe curious about this metal beast rolling through its domain. The rest of the drive was uneventful, but my mind kept racing back to that moment. What did I see? A trick of light and heat? A secret resident of the desert, unknown and unseen? I Googled everything from desert mirages to undiscovered animals in the area. You wouldn't believe the rabbit holes that can take you down. By the time I got to the motel, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I checked in, a little bell dinging as I opened the door to the front office. The guy behind the counter had that look, the one that says he's seen it all and then some. I figured, why not? So I told him what I saw. He didn't laugh, didn't even look surprised. He just nodded slowly, stroking his chin like he was piecing together a jigsaw puzzle. Then he leaned forward, elbows on the counter, and in a voice made for ghost stories, he told me about the legends, tales of creatures that roamed the desert, always just out of sight, known only to the native tribes who'd lived here long before the rest of us showed up. He talked about spirits and protectors, about beings that walked between worlds. I left the front office with my key and a head full of stories that felt too real to be just myths. I didn't sleep much that night, kept peering through the curtains, half expecting to see the desert come alive under the moonlight. The next morning, I was back on the road at dawn, the desert a silent expanse around me. I didn't see the creature again, and the more miles I put behind me, the more I convinced myself it was just a figment of my heat-stroked brain. But at the same time, I think maybe, just maybe, I got a glimpse of something magical that day, something that defies explanation. Or maybe it was just the desert, playing its tricks, like it has for millennia on the people who travel through it. Okay, so there I was, just another day wearing the badge as a park ranger, patrolling the vast stretches of the Grand Canyon. It blows my mind that this place is said to be about 5 or 6 million years old, but the rock layers, they go back even further, telling stories older than the dinosaurs. The canyon itself was carved by the Colorado River, cutting through layer after layer of rock, revealing all these insane colors and formations. Over time, it's become this natural archive, and cultures have sprung up around it for thousands of years, each one leaving their mark. We're talking Native Americans, settlers, explorers, the works. It's a natural wonder, sure, but it's also a historical treasure chest, with every stratum and cave holding secrets from a time most of us can hardly imagine. Most of my days blend into each other, but not this one. This was the day I'd stumble onto something that was way off the usual track. So I'm out there, doing my rounds, making sure hikers aren't getting themselves into trouble, and there's this path. Not marked on any map, more like the earth just kind of made room for it over time. It's this narrow, scrappy sort of trail, barely a couple of boots wide. There's red dust all over it, the kind that puffs up around your ankles with every step, like the ground's keeping count of your pace. The brush on either side is all wild and untamed, scrubby bushes and thorny plants that seem like they're whispering to each other when the wind blows through them. The rocks along the path are a jumble of shapes and sizes, some smooth and rounded from ages gone by, others sharp and jagged, fresh from the cliffs above. Every so often, there's a cairn, a little stack of stones that seems out of place, too deliberate for a spot no one's supposed to have trekked. The sun seems to hit this path differently too, like it's shining a spotlight, making the sandstone walls glow with an almost supernatural amber. I've been down most trails here, but this one new to me, and I couldn't figure out how I'd never seen it before. Curiosity got the better of me, and I figured, why not? Let's see where this goes and try to figure out what made it. One thing that I noticed right away was that the wind was different here. It wasn't just blowing, it was like it was speaking. Sounds crazy, right? But it was like whispers, weaving through the air. I couldn't make out words or anything, but it felt like if I listened hard enough, or get close enough, I might be able to understand. So I followed. I kept going until the whispers led me to this cave. Not the touristy kind with guardrails and signs. This was the real deal, hidden and was tucked away. Of course, I had to investigate, and so I stepped slowly inside, allowing my eyes to adjust to the darkness. And inside, let me tell you, it was like stepping into another time. There was pottery, the old kind that you'd see in museums, just scattered about. And the walls, they were covered in these drawings, pictographs that looked like they had stories to tell. These weren't your typical hunters and gatherers sketches. There was this one figure that kept showing up. It had this aura about it, like it was something more than human. The drawings showed it speaking to animals, guiding people, like a shaman or something. I was completely captivated. I spent hours in that cave just trying to take it all in. The weird part? The whole time I was in there, the whispers never stopped. I would periodically take myself back to the entrance to keep my wits about me, but I kept being drawn back inside that cave. Eventually it started to get dark, and I realized I had to head back. You don't want to be out here in the part of the park after dark. It's a whole different world. But the thing is, as I left the cave, the whispers, they kind of followed me out, and I could hear them until I got myself back on the main trail. I've headed back to see that cave a few times since, but the weird thing is that I can't find it again. No matter how hard I look for that dirt path that I had never seen before, I can't seem to pinpoint it. Now I'm wondering what in the world happened, and if I ever really took that adventure, even though I remember it so vividly. Either way, I guess the canyon's got more to it than just rocks and rivers. There are things here we don't understand, things that we never will, and we're maybe not supposed to. But I'll keep going back, trying to piece it together and see if I can find it again. Who knows? Maybe one day, it will all make sense to me. Maybe one day I'll understand what's going on and I'll be sure to let you know. Thanks for lending an ear to my story. So here's the deal. I've been hanging around Uncle Joe's farm here in Pennsylvania since I can't even remember when. It's one of those places with more fields than you can count, all stuffed with corn and a small apple orchard. Uncle Joe, well, he's the sturdy type, not much for chit-chat, but the kind of guy who'd give you the shirt off his back. Our family never bothered much with the city life. This small town and the farm's got all we need. His house is pretty old school, kind of like one of those houses you'd draw when you were little, with a chimney puffing out smoke and all. The paint's seen better days, and the porch has heard a lifetime of stories. It's snug and a little bit messy, but it's comfortable and like home to me. Step outside, dodge the chickens, and you'll bump right into the apple orchard. It's just past the shed that's always one good storm away from becoming a pile of sticks. So there I was, out in the old orchard that stretched beyond the last fence of the farm. I remember the day was just turning into late afternoon, and the sun was beginning to dip low, throwing long shadows between the rows of ancient apple trees. The air was cool, the kind that's just right for a hoodie and a pair of worn jeans. I'd been out there before plenty of times, but that day was different. There was this stillness, like the kind of quiet you get when a storm's about to break. But the sky was clear, not a single cloud to hint at a change in the weather. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe it was just the change of seasons getting to me, or maybe I was just more tired than I thought. I had my bucket in hand and I was going about the usual picking apples, the ripe ones that practically fell off the branches when you touched them. Some of them were that perfect kind of apple red. Others were green with a blush on one side. As a kid, I always liked to think they were shy or something. It was peaceful work, the kind that lets your mind wander. But then that feeling crept up on me, that prickly sensation on the back of your neck. I'd reach for an apple, and I'd hesitate, feeling eyes on me. I'd look around, expecting to catch a deer or a rabbit scuttling through the underbrush, but there was nothing, just me and the trees and the faint rustle of leaves. It was when I was reaching up, stretching for this one apple that looked like it was ready to come home with me, that I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. It was like part of the tree moved, but not like any part should move. It was slow, deliberate, like a sloth when you watch them on a nature show. But this creature was tall, its skin rough and grooved like the bark of the trees around us. Its eyes, they were deep set, like knots in wood, dark and knowing. It was strange, like seeing a face in the wood grain that you can't unsee. And it was watching me, not in a menacing way, but with a kind of curiosity that you'd show to something new in your environment. I remember freezing, my hand still in the air, holding that apple. My mind was racing. What was this? Why was it here? So many questions flooded my head, but obviously no answers came. All I knew was that it felt old as the trees, maybe older, like this was its domain and not mine. There was something about it that made me think of the guardians of ancient things that watch over places. It didn't move toward me, didn't make a sound. It just watched. I got the sense that it was figuring out what kind of creature I was. I lowered my hand slowly, not wanting to make any sudden moves. I remembered stories my grandma used to tell me, ones where the old spirits of the land watched over it, and if you showed them respect, they'd do you no harm. I wasn't sure if I believed in those stories, but standing there, with that creature's eyes on me, I wasn't about to take any chances. So I nodded to it, a kind of acknowledgement, and I said quiet like, "I'm just here for a few apples. I'll take no more than I need." And I swear I could have imagined it, but it felt like the air around us changed, softened maybe. The creature blinked slowly, like it understood, and then it just sort of melted back into the trees. One second it was there, the next it was just another part of the orchard. I picked my apples, but I was careful about it. I made sure not to break any branches, not to take too much, and all the while I felt those eyes on me, just out of sight, making sure I kept to my word. When I left, the bucket half full but enough for what I needed, I turned back at the edge of the orchard. I don't know why, maybe to say thank you, maybe just to convince myself I hadn't dreamed the whole thing up. But there was nothing there, just the evening light turning everything to gold and the quiet rustle of leaves. I've been back to the orchard since then, and I've never seen the creature again. But sometimes, when the light's just right and the world's quiet, I feel those eyes on me, and I remember to show a little respect to the old places of the world. You never know who might be watching after all. Hey everyone, have you ever felt a chill creep up your spine from the feeling that you just encountered something that the world usually keeps hidden? Well, buckle up, because today I'm taking you deep into the heart of Acadia National Park. I'm about to share a tale that straddles the thin line between reality and myth, a story about Hannah, a wildlife specialist who stumbled upon a mystery that defied explanation, a moose that wasn't just a moose but something more. So grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's unravel the mystery of Acadia's phantom moose together. Trust me, you won't see the ending coming. It was another foggy morning when Hannah set out, her boots sinking into the soft earth with each step. The reports had been trickling in for weeks, sightings of a moose that didn't seem right. Some visitors claimed it walked right through trees. Others swore its eyes glowed in the low light. Hannah, a wildlife specialist with years of experience in Acadia National Park, chalked it up to light patterns in the park. After all, moose were a common sight in Maine, but rarely seen in Acadia due to the majority of it being on an island. That day, Hannah found herself in the part of the park where most of the sightings had been reported. The air was crisp, and her breath came out in small clouds that mingled with the morning mist. She checked her equipment, camera, notebook, and one item she never left home without, an old pair of binoculars that belonged to her grandfather. He always said they were lucky. The park was waking up. The sounds of birds and the rustle of leaves filled the air, but the usual sounds seemed muted. Hannah shook off the eerie feeling and focused on the task at hand, which was figuring out what these visitors were actually seeing. She'd mapped out the reported sightings and planned to follow the trail that connected most of them. Hours passed, and the only moose she saw was one normal pair munching on willows. But as the sun began to dip and the light changed from the brightness of day to evening, Hannah felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She reached for her grandfather's binoculars and peered through them, scanning the tree line. And sure enough, there it was. A moose, but unlike any she'd seen before. Its form was hazy, like the heat waves that rise from hot asphalt, and it moved with an unnatural grace. It wasn't walking through trees, but it seemed almost unrestricted by them, its form shimmering whenever it passed a trunk. Hannah's heart raced, and she fumbled with her camera, trying to get proof of what she was seeing. The moose stopped, and for a moment, Hannah wondered if it knew she was there. Its eyes, indeed, glowed, just like the reports had stated. After about 5 or 10 minutes, the moose turned and walked slowly into the trees, fading away as if it had slowly become invisible. Hannah was left with a feeling of profound confusion and a sense of having witnessed something extraordinary. It was true. The reports were correct. There was a very strange creature roaming through Acadia. Over the following days, Hannah dug into the history of the park. She learned more about the indigenous people who once called this land home, about the settlers who came after, and the conservation efforts that turned these lands into a national park. She found old tales of spirit animals, guardians of the land and its people. None of the stories matched exactly what she'd seen, but they wove a tapestry that felt strangely relevant. Hannah returned to the same spot every day for a week, at dawn and dusk. The moose appeared twice more, each time just as ephemeral as the first. She began to feel that this creature wasn't just a mistake. She felt that it was a part of Acadia, as much as the rocks and trees and waters were a part of it too. She talked to the park rangers, to local historians, even to a few visitors who'd seen the moose themselves. They all had theories, but it was an old man, a member of the Wabanaki Confederacy, who gave her the piece that fit. "Land remembers," he told her over cups of strong tea. "It remembers the footsteps of all who walk on it. Sometimes it shows us those memories, but only if we're meant to see them." Hannah wasn't sure if she was meant to see the moose, but she felt honored that she had. As she continued her work in the park, she carried the story of the moose with her. sharing it with those who would listen, adding it to the lore of Acadia. The moose never appeared to her again, but sometimes, when the light was just right, she could feel the presence of something grand and intangible. It was a reminder that sometimes confusion and wonder were two sides of the same coin, and she was more than happy to be a part of it all. Hey everyone, I'm about to take you on a wild ride through the snowy streets of a small Pennsylvania town where a man named Charles came face to face with something that defied explanation. It's a night he said he'll never forget, a night that makes him worried about what else is lurking in the streets and might be just out of sight. So grab your favorite blanket, dim the lights, and let's dive into the mystery of Philipsburg. I live in a small town in Pennsylvania named Philipsburg, just west of State College. I've always been open to the idea of the supernatural, and stumbling upon your channel has only deepened my curiosity. So this one time, in mid-January 2013, around 7 p.m., I had an experience that still gives me the chills. It was a dark, snowy evening, the kind where snowflakes blanket everything, and not a single car dared to challenge the roads. Quite unusual for that time of day since it's peak hour for folks returning from work. I had just finished my shift and was on my way home after stopping by a buddy's place to collect some cash he owed me. As I was driving down Main Street toward my apartment, something bizarre caught my attention. There, by a yellow yield sign at the intersection, stood a man. But this was no ordinary man. He was incredibly tall, unnaturally so, with a frame so slender it almost defied logic, like a living stick figure but with an uncanny level of detail. He was bald, naked, and his skin had this pale grayish-white hue. The streetlights cast just enough glow to see him clearly, but not enough to discern the finer details, not that I wanted to. His proportions were all off. His arms were freakishly long compared to his legs. Our eyes met, and he smiled. It was this massive, ear-to-ear grin that felt totally out of place. I can't shake the image. It was just plain creepy. The fact that he was out there in the middle of a snowstorm with no clothes on set off all kinds of alarms in my head. I even wondered if I should call the police, but I didn't want to try and explain this to my small-town police force. We all know each other, and I didn't want to look like I was losing it. My instincts screamed at me to leave, so I took a quick left onto another street, hoping to find some semblance of normalcy. But that road was deserted too, not a car in sight, nor parked along the curb. The silence was another thing that struck me. There were no sounds, which is odd now that I think about it. As I continued driving, an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. I felt terrified without reason, sensing deep in my bones that I needed to get as far away as possible. So at the next intersection, instead of going straight, I jerked the wheel right, heading straight for my apartment complex. It seemed to take an eternity to get home, with every rearview mirror glance revealing the tall man inch closer. He wasn't running or anything, he was just nearer every time I looked. Then just like that, he disappeared from view, ramping up my fear because now I had no clue where he could be. Once I parked, I bolted inside, but as soon as I entered, I felt compelled to look out the window, and there, under a streetlight on Main Saint, was another figure, similar to the first, except this one had a wild mane of hair and was draped in a robe. He stood as still as a statue, his gaze locked on me. But when our eyes met, a wave of calm washed over me, and I felt an odd sense of reassurance. I was fine until 2 days later when someone posted about a slender man on their site, and the stories were eerily similar to my encounter. It hit me then, just how close these beings are to where I live and work. So, what's your take? Did I encounter two slender men? The term the tall men seems to fit better than the shadow men now. If anything, this experience has cracked open a whole new world of possibilities concerning cryptids and paranormal entities for me. I have a lot to think about. And hey, I love your channel. Keep the videos coming so we all can keep learning about these mysterious beings that seem to just show up and scare the crap out of us. I guess I should tell you a bit about myself first. My name's Jennifer, and I've been a lover of the wild since I could barely walk. It's in my blood, you might say. My folks were both rangers, so my earliest memories are filled with the sounds and smells of the forest, the feel of dirt under my fingernails, and the sight of the trees all around. I grew up here, in the midst of Yosemite's grandeur. Some kids had playgrounds. I had an entire national park. It was my backyard, my school, and my sanctuary. When life threw curveballs at me, as it does for everyone, I always found my balance among these rocks and trees. So there I was, one day in August of 2018. The sun was bright in the afternoon sky, but heading down behind the towering cliffs. I had my binoculars out. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just watching climbers on El Capitan. It's kind of a ritual for me, watching these little specks of humans take on this massive slab of granite. They look like ants from where I sit, inching their way up, but you can tell it's a battle, a real struggle against the raw power of nature. I must have been watching for hours, the light changing, shadows growing longer, and the climbers making their slow progress. It's meditative in a way, kind of like watching a fish tank, but with more adrenaline. And as the sky turned this brilliant shade of orange, something unusual caught my eye. At first I thought it was another climber, but this one was moving too fast, too confidently. It didn't have any ropes or gear, nothing. It was just soaring up the rock face, and I couldn't make sense of it. I kept my binoculars glued to this figure, trying to understand what I was seeing. It was covered in fur, kind of like a bear, but not quite. It moved more like a person, but there was no way any person could move like that, not without ropes. It was almost like it was part of the mountain, you know? It climbed with such ease, such grace, that it was almost supernatural. And then, as it reached the summit, it stood there for just a second, silhouetted against the now fading light. I swear, it had the upper body of a man and the lower body of a goat. I'm not saying it was a mythical creature or anything, but in that moment, my mind was racing through every story I'd ever heard, every legend and myth. Then just like that, it disappeared over the summit. Gone. I was left there, staring at the spot where it vanished, feeling this mix of awe and confusion. I didn't know what to think. Was it a new species, something that had evolved to live on these sheer cliffs? Or was it something else, something that wasn't supposed to exist? I continued to look for it for well over an hour, but when it didn't re-emerge, I packed up my stuff, started to head back home. What I had seen was haunting in a way, but also exhilarating. I mean, I thought I'd seen it all during my many years in the park, but this took the cake. I asked around, of course, talked to some of the rangers my parents had worked with, and even some of the climbers I knew. Most of them said there was sure to be a logical explanation. But there was this one old climber who had to be in his 70s. He'd been climbing here his whole life, and he looked at me with these keen, sharp eyes when I told him what I saw. He didn't say much, just nodded slowly, and mentioned he'd seen some strange things on the cliffs over the years too. Things he couldn't explain. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't press him. Somehow, I didn't need to. It was enough to know that the mystery was shared, that I wasn't the only one who'd seen something unexplainable. That night, I lay in my bed with the sound of the wind whispering through the pines. I thought about that creature, about the vast wilderness that stretched out beyond my little world, and everything else that might be out there and unknown. I mean, there's so much we don't know, so much that remains hidden in the wild places of the world, and I like it like that. So, was it real? Did I really see what I think I saw? I can't say for sure, but every time I go back to Yosemite, You can be sure that I look up at El Capitan, and I wonder what's really out there, beyond where we can see, living in places we can't reach. It's a comforting thought, in a way, knowing that there are still mysteries waiting to be discovered, or maybe just to be wondered at, from a safe distance with a pair of binoculars. Hey everyone, ever wonder about all the mysteries that are unfolding in the unseen spaces that are difficult to see? I bet you have. So strap in, because I'm about to share a story that ventures into the uncharted corners of reality. Meet Mike Hansen, just your everyday officer patrolling the streets of Ashland, Oregon. But one night, his mundane routine takes a turn into the realm of the extraordinary. We're diving deep into a night at Lithia Park that defies explanation, where Mike encounters something that challenges the very fabric of what we know. So make sure you're comfy, because this ride through a terrifying world of fog and fear is going to be one for the books. Don't touch that dial. Your belief in the impossible is about to be tested. It was one of those nights in Ashland, Oregon, the kind where the fog rolls in thick like cotton stuffed between the houses and trees, and you can't see but 2 feet ahead. Officer Mike Hansen was on the late shift, cruising through the empty streets when the radio crackled to life. Dispatch to Unit 22. We've got reports of some kind of disturbance over at Lithia Park. Neighbors are hearing strange noises. Could you check it out? Mike sighed, flipping on his headlights that barely cut through the pea soup fog. Copy that, dispatch. Heading there now. He had been through the routine 1,000,000 times. Probably some teenagers messing around, or a homeless guy. Nothing that would make for a good story later. But he liked it that way. Simple, no surprises. Lithia Park was different at night. The trees loomed like giants, and the usually welcoming paths twisted into something more sinister. Mike parked near the duck pond, the water still and reflecting the few visible lights. The noises that had been reported weren't obvious at first, but as he killed the engine, the silence seemed to press in, and then he heard it. A low, guttural groaning, like the earth itself was moaning. He stepped out of the cruiser, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Hello?" he called out, his voice sounding feeble in the thick air. No answer, just the groaning again, closer this time. Mike's hand instinctively went to his holster, though he doubted he'd need anything inside it. It was probably just some animal caught in a trash bin. Yeah, that had to be it. As he moved toward the sound, his flashlight beam dancing over dewy grass and fog, something shifted in the air. It was like the fog was moving, rearranging itself, and for a second, Mike's heart hitched in his chest. Then he saw eyes glowing faintly like coals in the mist. They blinked and were gone. "Damn fog," he muttered to himself, shaking his head. But there was a prickle on the back of his neck that wouldn't go away. He was trained to trust his instincts, and right now, they were screaming at him that something wasn't right. Mike approached the spot where he'd seen the eyes, and that's when he heard it. A scraping sound, like claws on stone. His flashlight found nothing but the empty path. Then, in the beam, something impossible appeared. It was a creature, but unlike anything Mike had ever seen or heard of outside of late-night creature features. It had the body of a large dog, but its skin was like the fog itself, swirling and shifting so that you couldn't quite focus on it. The eyes were the only solid thing about it, bright and piercing. Then, as quickly as they'd locked with Mike's, they vanished, and the creature was gone. Mike stood frozen, trying to process what he'd just seen. It wasn't possible. Creatures like that didn't exist, not in the real world and certainly not in Ashland, Oregon. But he couldn't deny what he'd seen, what he was still seeing, because the fog seemed to be swirling in a way that suggested movement, a form retreating. He reported back to dispatch, keeping his voice even. Unit 22 to dispatch. Looks like it was just an animal, probably a stray dog. nothing to worry about. He couldn't bring himself to say what he'd really seen. They'd think he was crazy. For the next few weeks, Mike kept an eye on the park, especially on foggy nights. He never saw the creature again, but sometimes he'd hear that same low groaning, and once in a while, he'd find tracks, large, unidentifiable prints that would end abruptly, as if the creature had simply vanished into thin air. His colleagues noticed his new obsession. "Hanson, you're chasing ghosts," they'd say, or, "Lay off the horror movies, man." Mike would just shrug. What could he say? That he'd seen a creature that defied explanation, that made him question his own sanity? But Mike knew what he saw. It had touched something primal in him, a fear of the unknown that was both exhilarating and terrifying. He kept his eyes open, always half expecting to see those glowing eyes in the mist again. But as time passed, the incident at Lithia Park became just another strange story among the cops in Ashland, whispered about, but never fully believed. Mike Hanson kept his secret, though, holding on to the wonder and fear of that foggy night when the world had shown him that it was much bigger and stranger than he could have ever imagined. All right, so Alex had been up at the glacier for weeks, Glacier National Park in Montana, doing his research. The guy's pretty much always rambling about ice cores this and climate change that. He'd spend every moment he could up there, drilling, measuring, and even talking to the ice like it was an old friend. He had this theory that the glaciers were storytellers, and that they could reveal the history of the Earth that has been trapped in them for eons. So it was late June or maybe early July, and Alex is out there with his ice drill and all his geeky equipment, and the ice is singing. Yeah, I know. Ice doesn't exactly have vocal cords, but up there it cracks and groans like it's telling old stories. He's used to it, but this night, something sounded and felt different. He kept looking over his shoulder, feeling like someone was about to walk up on him. Days before, at the little ramshackle bar in the nearest town, this crusty old guy with a beard you could lose a cat in starts spinning stories about the spirits of the ice, spirits that guarded the glacier and weren't too happy about it melting away. Alex laughed it off, said something science-y, and ordered another round. But there he was, now out on the ice field, and he sees this shape. At first, he thinks it's just the sun setting, or maybe he's got frostbite in the brain from being out there for hours. But no, it's there. A figure, just standing on the ice, not far off. It's made of ice too, or that's what it looks like from a distance, like a man sculpted out of the glacier itself. But its eyes were like two pieces of the deepest ocean frozen into its face, glowing like creatures from the Marianas Trench. Alex, he's not superstitious, and feels everything can be explained by science, but he can't move, can't even breathe right. He's just staring at this Iceman, and the Iceman is staring right back, just watching silently. Then, as if the thing realizes Alex has seen too much, it turns, and it starts walking away, each step merging with the ice until it just fades into the glacier, walking along the streams of meltwater. He didn't sleep much after that, kept going on about global warming being bad enough without adding vengeful ice spirits to the mix. But he didn't pack up, didn't leave. He wanted to see it again, wanted to understand. I think it got to him, not knowing what it was. The unknown can be like a splinter in your mind, right? You just can't find it and get rid of it. So the next evening, he's out there again, same spot. And sure enough, as the twilight turns the world into this half-lit dreamscape, there it is. The figure emerges again, but this time, it's closer to him. Alex reckons he can see details, like patterns etched into its surface. It's beautiful, in a terrifying sort of way. The thing about Alex, he's curious to a fault. He starts moving towards it, slow, like he's afraid he'll spook it. But the creature doesn't retreat this time. It's as if it's waiting for him. He stops maybe 10 feet away, close enough to see that the eyes aren't just glowing, They're very alert and calculating. He's got this crazy idea to talk to it. Starts with a hello that gets swallowed by the vastness of the ice. But then, the thing, it sort of tilts its head. Alex feels like he's standing at the edge of a cliff, about to jump into madness, as he asks, "Why are you here?" Then just like that, the connection snaps. The figure steps back, blends into the ice once more, leaving Alex with a heart pounding like a drum and a mind racing with questions that he doesn't have answers to. He talks about it sometimes, when the beer has gone to his head. That's when he says the Iceman's the loneliest thing he's ever seen, an image of a dying world. And Alex, he looks out the window, eyes getting that distant sheen, and you can tell part of him never left that glacier, is still standing there in the twilight, reaching out to something extraordinary and impossible. And the truth is, he went back, night after night, but the Iceman never showed again. And to this day, the glacier keeps shrinking. And Alex? He got quieter, more thoughtful. He's wondering what else is being revealed by the melting ice, and hopes to one day find the answers he's looking for. So I'm hesitant to share this with you because talking about it makes it way more real, and I've been trying to forget all about what happened. But since that's not working, I'm putting it out there to try and get the closure I need. Let me set the scene of what happened that night. It was last summer and I was camping in the White River National Forest in Colorado. It was just me and a moonlit night, the air crisp. I was huddled around a campfire that was more of a dim flicker than a blaze, just enough to keep my palms warm when I held them out towards the flames. The shadows flickered as they always do when you're sitting at a fire, making it hard to see clearly beyond the flames. Now I've had my fair share of wild nights. I've told stories about those too. This one is different. The usual sounds of crickets and rustling leaves suddenly went silent. It was a quiet kind of heaviness. It was like the critters in the forest knew something I didn't, and I was just waiting for whatever had quieted them to come along and strike me down. The feeling of too many empty beer cans. But man, that feeling was a stubborn one. It nagged at the edges of my mind like the corner of the bedsheet that just won't stay tucked. The second I'd snuff it out, it would spring right back up and renew my fear. As the night continued, the wind picked up, but it wasn't the usual gentle breeze. It was now sharp. It was a whistle, a warning when I think about it, but I didn't recognize it then. So I stayed. I strained my ears as the whistling noise faded, trying to catch any other peculiar sounds, and that's when it hit. A low, guttural growl that sent a shiver down my spine. And this sound was evil. I could feel it. I reached for my flashlight. The thin yellow beam soon revealed a colossal shadow at the edge of the forest. The air suddenly got thick with a smell that turned my stomach, a pungent musk that mixed with the familiar scent of damp earth. The forest and I held our breath together, as if to see which of us would choke first. It was me. Out of the shadows emerged this creature, covered in matted fur that seemed to absorb the light from my flashlight. Its eyes, reflecting that light like a cat's, locked onto mine. Call it whatever you want. I've heard plenty of names. In that moment, to me, it was only the beast. It was in the beast that had come from the woods to stamp out my fire, and maybe even my life. I stumbled backward, and the creature mirrored my movement. It wasn't just some wild animal. It had a wisdom that was way greater than the usual critters you find in the woods. You know how you can see knowledge and experience in the eyes of an old man? It was like that. It just knew more, certainly more than me, about the forest. My mind was doing somersaults trying to process what was happening. I spent too long in awe and not enough time running away. Reality took a nosedive. This thing wasn't a legend. It was a living, breathing thing. The woods suddenly felt like a cage around me. Soon I'd be trapped with this thing. I tried to shake off the shock, reached for my phone to capture the moment. At least a picture would prove my sanity. but like a cosmic joke, as I raised it, my phone just died. No warning, no low battery, just an empty black screen. Now you'd think I'd finally be ready to haul my butt out of there. Believe me, I tried. Tripping over branches and rocks, I made it to the clearing that bridged the parking area and the hiking trails. In the daylight, this place would have felt safe, but that creature wasn't giving up. Its growls followed me, making sure I knew that I wasn't alone in that dark maze of trees. In the clearing, I thought I'd caught a break. I doubled over to catch my breath before a large stone crashed into the earth beside me. A few inches to the left, and my leg would have been broken. I broke into a sprint. I moved as fast as I could, having found myself as the lead in some backwoods horror movie. If the clearing had been a momentary truce between myself and the monster, that truce had been broken. Nowhere was safe. Then it happened. It cut me off somehow, got around me. The creature stood between myself and the parking lot. I could make out the silhouette of my lone car upon the gravel, but two glaring eyes loomed between myself and the driver's side door. Panic was begging me to keep running. I couldn't. We locked eyes, and that growl softened. I watched it blink. I watched the meanness melt away from its expression. What was different and why so suddenly? I didn't understand. If I thought to speak, I might have. I might have asked it. Maybe it could have answered me. But at the end of its lingering stare, the creature vanished into the shadows. The forest finally exhaled. The bars on my cage expanded, and I was left there, feeling like I'd just lived through some wild campfire story. Maybe I did, huh? I slumped to the ground, adrenaline shaking in my hands. The forest, once my sanctuary, had become something else. As I sat there, surrounded by trees that still felt more foreboding than familiar, I couldn't help but wonder, did I really come face to face with that monster? Or was it just the wild playing tricks on me? Too many drinks, too many scary stories, too many nights alone in the woods. I just couldn't square it away. Why would it let me go? I know I saw something, but I don't know where it came from and I don't know where it went. I can't wrap my head around it all. What do you think? So I've got this tale for you straight out of Duluth, Minnesota. Never thought I'd be the one to tell it, but here we are. It's about Emma Carlson, an officer who's been patrolling the Lake Superior shoreline longer than she'd care to admit. Folks around here respect her. She's got an eye for detail and a knack for figuring things out that don't make sense at first glance. It started like any other whisper of gossip you'd hear in a lakeside town. Fishermen spinning tales of something strange in the water. They said it was unlike any fish or log bobbing in the waves. This was something else. Most folks didn't give the stories much attention, but not Emma. She had a gut feeling that there was more to these stories. Something in the way these seasoned fishermen clutched their caps and refused to meet each other's eyes told her this was no ordinary fish story. She started to ask around, casually at first, but the more she heard, the less it all made sense. The fishermen spoke of a creature, large and indistinct, moving under the water with purpose. It wasn't aggressive, they said, just there, as if it had always been a part of the lake, just out of sight. They'd catch glimpses when the dawn mist clung to the water, or as dusk turned the waves to molten silver. Each sighting was a brushstroke in a larger picture that no one could quite see clearly. Curiosity turned to mild obsession for Emma. She pored over local legends, the stories passed down through generations that most considered nothing more than campfire tales to spook the kids. But the threads were there. Tales of a guardian spirit of the lake, a creature that was part of the very essence of Superior itself. The investigation was slow going. Emma's days off were spent out on the lake, her eyes scanning the water, hoping for a chance to see something for herself. And then, one evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned a purplish color, it happened. She wasn't sure what made her look up, but there it was, a serpentine form undulating gracefully just beneath the water's surface. It was massive, spanning what looked like the length of 2 boats end to end. Its skin was like liquid night, absorbing the fading light, and its eyes. They glowed with a pale, almost luminescent hue that seemed to pierce right through the veil of water between them. Emma's heart hammered in her chest, her breath caught in her throat. She watched, motionless, as the creature moved with an ancient grace, its presence both terrifying and awe-inspiring. It was a part of the lake in a way that she could never have imagined. In that moment, she understood what the fishermen had struggled to put into words. This creature was as much a part of their lives as the tides and the changing seasons. As it passed beneath her boat, she could feel a kind of communication, a sense of understanding that didn't need words. The creature's gaze held hers, and a cascade of images flooded her mind. The history of the lake, the generations of people who had lived beside it, and the silent promise that the creature's presence was a sign of the lake's health and vitality. When it slipped away into the depths, leaving only the gentle lapping of water against the hull, Emma sat there for a long time, the afterimage of the creature's eyes etched into her vision. She knew that the story of her encounter would be met with skepticism, that it would be easier to keep it to herself. But there was a bigger picture. The legends weren't just stories. They were a cultural heritage, a living history of the people and the lake they depended on. She went back to shore with a renewed sense of purpose. The tales she'd heard and the creature she'd seen wove together, forming a narrative she felt compelled to share. It wasn't just about a mysterious aquatic creature. It was about respect for the lake and the life it sustained. Emma became a liaison of sorts, a bridge between the old legends and the modern world. She organized gatherings where the elders shared their stories and the fishermen spoke of their sightings. Together, they created a new understanding of Lake Superior, not as a resource to be exploited, but as a living entity to be respected. And as for Emma, she still patrols the shoreline, her eyes ever watchful. But now, there's a different kind of smile on her face when she looks out over the water, one that speaks of secrets shared and a truth that binds them all to the vast, mysterious lake. Hey everyone, have you ever felt like the world's got no more secrets left? That every mystery's been solved by science or spoiled by the internet? Well, buckle up, because I'm about to take you to a small town where the snow hides more than just footsteps. You're going to meet Officer Nicole Harper, the kind of person you'd trust to find your lost cat or help you out when you're in a bind. But trust me, nothing could have prepared her for what she stumbled upon one icy evening. This isn't your typical wildlife chase or a campfire story. No, this is about a discovery so unexpected, it challenges everything we think we know about the wild and ourselves. So, grab your coat and a hot drink, because we're about to track down the truth in the snowy shadows of Traverse City, Michigan. Okay, so picture this. Traverse City, Michigan, a place usually blanketed in snow this time of year. That's where you'd find Nicole Harper, a local police officer. Nicole wasn't the protagonist type you'd read about in stories. She was more like someone you'd run into at the grocery store, maybe exchange a smile with while picking out vegetables. Nicole's life was a steady stream of routines, patrols, paperwork, and the occasional coffee run. But there was something about the simplicity of her life that made you root for her. Maybe it was the way she'd brush the snow off the old lady's car on 5th Street, or how she always had a dog treat in her pocket for the strays. One morning, that routine was broken. It started with a call over the radio about something odd. Weird tracks in the snow at the edge of town. These weren't your run-of-the-mill deer tracks that dotted the landscape. They were bigger, much bigger. With a frown creasing her forehead, Nicole drove out to the location. The snow was freshly fallen, the kind that crunched under your boots. As she followed the tracks, a sense of unease washed over her. They led to the edge of the forest, and she decided not to go in without backup. Turns out the higher-ups also decided to totally call of the investigation. But as days turned into weeks, the tracks kept appearing. Each time now, they were accompanied by reports of missing animals. First a few chickens from a farm, then a goat, and even a horse. The town was buzzing with theories. A bear, maybe, or a pack of wolves. But Nicole couldn't shake the feeling that it was something else, something more. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Nicole decided to get to the bottom of it and do a stakeout. She found a spot near where the tracks had been found last, settled in, and waited. The cold seeped into her bones, and the hours ticked by slowly. Then, amidst the stillness, a rustle. Nicole's breath caught in her throat as a figure emerged from the trees. It was unlike any creature she had ever seen. Its fur was a deep russet, almost glowing in the twilight. It moved with a grace that seemed impossible for its size, and its eyes were the most human she'd ever seen on an animal. The creature's coat was thick, with tufts of white at the edges, giving it an almost ethereal outline against the snow. Each paw was wide and padded, the claws retracted, but leaving imprints deep enough to suggest their formidable nature. The head was broad and noble, framed by ears that were pointed and alert, twitching at every sound. As it turned its face towards Nicole, she noticed a pattern of darker fur that swept across its cheeks and above its eyes, accentuating a gaze that was intelligent and piercing. The eyes themselves were a striking amber, with flecks of green that caught the light, almost otherworldly in their intensity. The body of the creature was muscular yet lean, built for agility. Its limbs were long and seemed to possess a power that was relaxed yet ready to spring into action. The torso tapered to a slender waist, leading to a tail that was bushy and long, swaying gently as it moved, as if it was perfectly balancing its every step. Nicole knew in her gut this was the creature responsible for the disappearances, but as she watched it, she felt no fear, only a profound sense of wonder. This creature, it was a relic of a bygone era, a living piece of history that science had declared extinct. In that moment, Nicole's world shifted. Here she was, face to face with a testament to the resilience of nature, a creature that had survived against all odds. It was a stark reminder that the line between the urban and the wild was thinner than she'd thought. The creature stared at her for a long, heart-stopping moment, then turned and disappeared back into the forest. Nicole didn't chase it. Somehow, she knew it was a sign that the balance of nature was not hers to enforce, but to respect. She reported back, of course, but with a story carefully edited. She spoke of a bear, an explanation the town readily accepted. The tracks stopped appearing after that night, and life in Traverse City returned to normal. But Nicole was changed. She carried the secret with her, a silent promise to protect the delicate dance between man and nature. As winter gave way to spring, Nicole found herself walking more, watching the forest with new eyes. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was part of something larger, a story that stretched back through the ages. The creature had shown her that there was still magic in the world, hidden in plain sight, for those willing to see it. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Sophia always had a knack for finding the pulse of any place she visited, an urban explorer with a penchant for the esoteric corners of her own city, Miami. Her friends would say that the word adventure might as well have been her middle name. However, Miami's sun-drenched streets and neon lights held no secrets for her anymore. She yearned for something raw, something that whispered of the earth's hidden tales. That's how she found herself one Saturday morning, with the dawn barely breaking, renting a canoe at the edge of the Everglades. She had heard stories, of course, legends that slipped through the cracks of fireside chats, and found their way into the wide-eyed wonder of those who dared to listen. But Sophia wasn't there for the tales. She was there for the silent thrum of nature, the dance of light on water, and the solitude that only such vastness could offer. As she paddled, the city's clamor faded into a distant memory, replaced by the symphony of the wild. Her rhythm was slow, almost meditative, matching the gentle sway of the reeds. The water's surface was a mirror, reflecting a world upside down, and for hours it was just Sophia, her canoe, and the endless stretch of water and sky. But then there was a shift, not in the wind or the weather, which remained as calm as ever, but in the water behind her. A ripple, subtle yet deliberate, and a feeling, an inexplicable one, that something was amiss. Sophia paused, her paddle hovering mid-stroke, and turned her head. At first, she saw nothing but the ripples fading into the calm. Then, as her gaze scanned the waterline, it was there, a long, serpentine neck just above the surface, its scales shimmering with an otherworldly luster. As the creature moved, it did so with a grace that matched other aquatic animals. Its serpentine form cut through the water with barely a sound, leaving only the faintest of ripples in its wake. The neck that Sophia had seen was only a small portion of its length, the rest of its body concealed beneath the water's surface, suggesting a creature of considerable size. The head was small and delicate in comparison to the neck, crowned with a fringe of thin, reed-like appendages that fluttered with each movement, perhaps serving as sensors to navigate the silty depths of the Everglades. The creature's mouth was a narrow slit, yet it never opened, its silence adding to its mysterious allure. It moved with purpose, yet without urgency. She blinked, and in that fraction of a second, the creature was gone, leaving behind a silent splash. Sophia's heart raced, her mind a torrent of confusion. Logic battled with the impossible image etched into her retina. She searched the water, but the creature was like a shadow. Every time she thought she caught a glimpse, it vanished, as if it were teasing her, testing her. Hours passed, and the sun began its descent, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. Sophia found herself back on land, the canoe resting beside her as she sat on the dock, her mind still out there in the water with the creature. That's when an old man approached, his eyes carrying years of unspoken knowledge. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked, his voice gravelly but kind. Sophia nodded, her voice a mere whisper. "What was it?" The old man settled beside her, his gaze lost in the ripples. "The Guardians," he said. "They've been here longer than any of us. They watch over these waters, protectors of the deep and all its secrets." "Guardians?" Sophia echoed, a skeptic's brow raised. "Some call it folklore, others, the ramblings of the old and superstitious," he continued. "But there are things in this world, young lady, that don't care for our belief to exist. They just are. Those creatures, they've been seen for generations. They show themselves to those they choose, those who come here with respect for this place." Sophia sat in silence, processing the weight of his words. She realized then that her adventure had taken a turn into the realms of the inexplicable, into stories that were whispered with reverence and a hint of fear. As night fell and she made her way back to the city, the experience nestled itself in her mind, a mystery that wouldn't let go. She knew she'd return, drawn by the enigma of the Guardians, by the allure of the unknown that now pulsed as strongly within her as the heart of Miami did. But for now, Sophia was content with the knowledge that there was still magic in the world, and it was real, tangible, and just within reach for those daring enough to look for it. The creature in the Everglades, with its serpentine neck and glowing eyes, had awakened in her a new thirst for the untold stories that lay hidden in plain sight, waiting to be discovered. You know how sometimes you hear a story that just keeps scratching away at you like a burr on a hiking sock? Well, grab your favorite drink, find a cozy spot, and let me tell you about Alan. This guy, he is an avid outdoorsman and practically part mountain goat. He got more than he bargained for on a solo trip out in Joshua Tree. It's a place that's otherworldly on a regular day, but for Alan, it turned into the backdrop of a story that toes the line between a sunstroke-induced hallucination and an encounter with something, let's just say, not supposed to be alive. Stick around as I recount Alan's hike into the unknown, a day that started with a simple trail and ended with him questioning everything he thought he knew about the desert. Joshua Tree National Park, located in the high desert of California, is the kind of place that does funny things to people. I mean, not funny as in haha, but funny as in odd. It's vast, alien, and whispers stories you think you dreamt up after a long night of deep sleep. So, when Alan told me about his hike in the park, I expected the usual, a tale of a cactus that looked like a strange creature, or rocks that seemed to shift places when you weren't looking. But his story? It was very different. It all started with a simple plan, a day trip, a loop trail when he planned to be back by dusk. Alan's been hiking since he could walk, practically, so he didn't bother much with preparations. A water bottle, his old boots, and a hat snatched from the hook by the door. That was it. Real old school. Alan always said nature was the best plan maker, and he just liked to show up. But on that day, the desert sun was especially unforgiving, like it knew he had shown up on a whim and feeling confident. He wandered off the trail early on, lured by a rock formation that looked like a hand reaching for the sky. The thing about Joshua Tree is, once you're off the trail, it's like stepping into a different world. The silence is heavy, and time stretches and bends. Alan was no rookie, but even he could be tempted. Hours must have passed, with Alan's water supply running as dry as the surrounding creek beds. He started to feel it then, the confusion, the dizziness. He had done this sort of hike before under similar conditions and never had a problem. Something was off this day. He was smart enough to know he was in trouble. Heat stroke wasn't just a word in a first aid manual. It was here, wrapping its fingers around his throat. He started to look around with the intentions of retracing his steps, but realized that he was completely disoriented. He had no idea which was up or down or east or west, and on top of it, the world seemed to be fuzzy, like when you're looking through heat, and that's when he saw it, a shimmer. Not the usual wavering of the air you see above a scorching road, but a shape. It moved, or maybe it danced. Alan rubbed his eyes, sure he was seeing things. Hallucinations are a sign of dehydration after all. But when he looked again, the figure was clearer, not a heat haze, but something solid. It was tall, taller than any man, and it moved with purpose. Alan followed because what else could he do? He was lost, and whatever this was, it seemed to be the only living thing for miles. Maybe it was the delirium, but he felt no fear, only a pressing need to see where this creature of heat and light would lead him, hoping it could help him. The figure led him through rocky gorges and past Joshua trees that stood guard like ancient guardsmen. And then, in a place where the rocks made a close circle, the figure stopped. Alan stepped forward, and his foot broke through the mirage. Water, cool and clear, pooled at his feet, hidden in the desert's embrace. An oasis. Alan didn't hesitate. He sunk to his knees and drank like he'd never tasted water before. Each gulp was life returning to him, the fog lifting from his brain. He splashed his face, feeling the grit of the desert wash away. When he had his fill, he looked around, eager to thank whatever it was that led him here. But the figure was gone. Only the wind was there, a low whistle through the rocks that might have been a voice once. Alan filled his bottle, the water sweet as salvation, and somehow found his way back to the trail, back to a world that made sense. He's a practical man. not given to flights of fancy. But there, in the sanctuary of his kitchen, he spoke of the desert with a reverence I hadn't heard before. He's not sure what happened, and keeps wondering if he dreamt it all or if it really happened to him. Either way, he's been knocked down a few notches and no longer feels he can take on nature like he used to. And me? I don't know what to make of it. The desert's a place of secrets, of stories that can go two ways. Maybe Alan met a ghost, a spirit, or a guardian of the wilderness. Or maybe the desert, in its strange way, decided to lend a hand to a wandering soul. Whatever it was, Alan's alive to tell the tale, and that's enough for both him and me. What do you think? So Jenny Broussard, she's been on the force for a good while in Venice. It's a peculiar place, you know? Not Italy's Venice. I'm talking about Venice, Florida. Got its own set of rules, its own kind of normal. And Jenny, she fits right in. Been dealing with the usual domestic squabbles, the odd break-in, gators turning up where they shouldn't. The usual for Florida anyway. This one day, though, it wasn't just another call. Around dusk, dispatch had this kind of shaky voice on the line, talking about something stuck in a canal. Not screaming or nothing, just unsettled. So they sent Jenny. She's good with it. She's dealt with this kind of thing before. It's Florida, after all. This is just par for the course. Jenny pulls up, and there's this small crowd gathered at the edge of the water. They're all quiet, which is strange enough in itself. She pushes through, tells them to make way, and that's when she sees it. It isn't a gator, though, at least not like any she's seen. Sure, it's got a snout, long and pointy, but its skin's all wrong, too smooth, and its eyes are not at all like a gator. And the limbs, those weren't gator limbs. They were sort of reaching out, not flailing, not struggling. It was like they were exploring, feeling around almost like how an octopus does. And the hands at the end, or they looked like hands, had too many joints, bending in ways that made Jenny's stomach turn a bit. Needless to say, despite all of her experience, this thing gave her pause. She radioed in, tried to describe what she's seeing, but words don't really do it justice. They just sound so far-fetched when you say them out loud. The thing, it must have felt all the eyes on it, because it turns, real slow, and for some reason looks right at Jenny. There's this moment, this stretch of nothing, where it's just Jenny and the creature staring at each other. The crowd, the water, the hum of the evening bugs, it all just fades out. Then, splash. The thing darts back into the canal. 1 second it's there, and the next, there are just ripples on the water. Jenny, she goes up to the edge, tries to see where it went, but it's like the murky water just swallowed it whole. No sign, no trace, nothing. Back at the station, Jenny files her report. Does it by the book, but you can tell her heart's not in it. There are questions, sure, but not the right ones. It's like everyone's more comfortable not knowing. You hear whispers here and there, some folks claiming she made it up, others completely ignoring it all. But mostly, it's like there's this unspoken thing to just let it be another Venice oddity. Days pass, then weeks. Life goes on. The canals keep flowing, the sun keeps setting, and Jenny keeps doing her job. But there's a change, a shift that's subtle but real everywhere in town. She notices as people's eyes linger on the water a bit longer, and people keep their pets a bit closer. And there's talk about the old stories, the legends that used to be. Way back, hundreds of years before Florida got popular from air conditioning making it livable. Jenny, she doesn't say much about it after that. What's there to say? But sometimes when the light's fading and the water's still, you can catch her looking out, scanning the surface. Maybe she's waiting for it to come back, or maybe she's wondering what else is out there, living alongside it and waiting for the right moment to show itself. As for the creature, well, it's a mystery, isn't it? Some stories don't have an ending, or maybe they do, and we just haven't gotten there yet. we might still be in the midst of this one. But one thing's for sure, Venice got a little stranger that day, and for folks like Jenny, it's just another part of the job. So there I was, deep in the Rockies, doing the usual count. I've been a ranger for, 10 years now or so. That day I was up by the northern ridge, where the pines cluster so thick you can hardly see the sky. Had my clipboard ticking off the numbers. Elk? Check. Deer? Check. Bear? No bears today. That actually was just fine with me. Then I stumbled onto this clearing. It was weird because in all my years, I hadn't seen it before. And it wasn't just me being forgetful. This place was like something out of a storybook, undisturbed, serene. But the really odd part was the animals that were there. They were all there, elk and deer, just hanging out. No tension, no spooking at my presence. Just calm. Now I'm not one to get all mystical, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there that shouldn't be. I mean, these creatures are prey, right? They should be jumping out of their skins, especially with a human trudging around. But they didn't even bat an eyelash. It was like they were hypnotized or something. I figured maybe it was some pheromone thing, or perhaps they were sick, which was a bit worrying. Disease can make animals act all sorts of strange. So I started looking them over from a distance, checking them, looking for signs of infection, injury, anything. They were in perfect health, every last one. That's when I heard it, a crack, like a branch snapping under heavy weight, heavier than a deer, quieter than a bear. I turned slow, hand edging toward the bear spray on my belt. And there it was. I kid you not, I was looking at a Bigfoot. I would have laughed if I weren't so stunned. There it stood, just at the edge of the clearing. Huge, shaggy. It looked curious. It didn't make a move toward me. Didn't growl or anything like you'd expect from a creature out of legend. Just stood there, watching the animals, then me, then back to the animals, like it was making sure everything was as it should be, and the animals seemed calmed by its presence, like they didn't have to worry about being protected. I don't know how long we stood like that, all of us looking back and forth at each other. Could have been minutes, could have been seconds. My heart was drumming in my chest, and my hand was tight on the bear spray, but I didn't use it. I just watched. Then, as if it decided I was no threat, it gave a soft grunt, turned, and melted back into the forest. Just like that. Gone. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding and scribbled down a note. Possible unidentified primate? What else could I write? I couldn't exactly radio in a Bigfoot sighting. They'd think I'd lost my marbles. I went back to that clearing every day for a week, but it was just a clearing. The animals were still calmer than you'd expect, but no Bigfoot. I wondered if I'd imagined it. Too many lonely nights in the woods, maybe. But then, I found a footprint. Huge, nothing like a bear. I cast it, took photos. I've got it hidden away. Sometimes I take it out and just look at it. I haven't told anyone because, what would I say? So there it is. That's my story. Make of it what you will. But sometimes, when the wind is just right and the forest goes quiet, I think I can feel it out there, watching, waiting, not threatening, just there, a guardian, a ghost. I don't know, but it sure is something big.